Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the Films Not Movie podcast. I'm Arron.
And I'm Charlotte. And in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the fairly new films, brand new films, Paterson, and also Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. And then also something a little bit older that we watched on Netflix, which was Star Trek Beyond. Did we watch it on Netflix?
No, we watched it. We rented it.
We rented it.
From Blockbuster Video. No, from a digital download store.
Very good.
Okay, so the first film we're going to talk about is Paterson, which is directed by Jim Jarmusch, or Jarmusch, I'm not sure entirely how you say that, and is starring man of the moment, Adam Driver.
And also starring Goldshifter Farahani, which I've had to say because Aaron wasn't sure how to say.
Easy for you to say.
Neither am I, but gave it a good stamp.
Okay, we're starting with this film because this is the new film that we have both seen this week, so we've got plenty to talk about. The outline of the plot is Adam Driver, who plays the character Paterson, is a bus driver in the town of Paterson, which I assume is a real town in America, I think it is. He is a bus driver, but he's also a aspiring poet. He kind of keeps his poems to himself mainly, but it plays a large part of the story. So, what are your opening thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's very different to most films in terms of the pace of things. It's a very slow pace, really just meandering through his life, and it's a week in his life. So, you know, he wakes up every morning and he goes to work, and it's kind of interweaving his day-to-day with his poetry and how he writes it, and that kind of forms part of the film, the actual poetry. So, you know, I can imagine it's not to everybody's cup of tea, but I really liked it.
Yeah, well, I think the quote that comes to mind when I think about this film is from a show that is completely dissimilar to the film, which is, it's a film about nothing. The classic Seinfeld quote, where if you told someone what the story of this film was, is a man goes to work 7 days in a row and comes home from work and has tea with his girlfriend. And he's not really got a life full of japes. He seems quite content living his life day to day, going to work, writes his poems in his little book, and doesn't seem... He's not a tortured soul who's waiting for the opportunity for his poems to be released on the world. He just writes little poems about his life, his day-to-day life, and they get on with it, don't they? Yeah,
but I mean, events do happen, but it's not sort of huge, mega drama events.
Yeah.
You know, the pace is always pretty gentle throughout.
Yeah. One thing that I felt like I really connected with this film is the character of Paterson. Maybe I'm not as calm as he is in the film, but whenever he's faced with anything that someone might blow up into a huge story about, oh my God, you won't believe what happened to me at work today, he's just plays things off very calmly. He's like, it's fine.
Yeah.
everything's fine. Whereas girlfriend, Laura, is a little bit more looking for, I wouldn't say looking for drama, but she's certainly a louder character.
She's a creative, as you like to say.
She's a creative. She's a creative type. She basically stays at home working on schemes.
Painting everything in sight.
Yeah, but as well as her own money-making schemes, whether they're usually a bit unconventional, like she's an aspiring musician and sells cupcakes and makes unusual pies.
Which makes it sound really, really twee. And it is a little bit twee, but it's not. And one thing we were worried about going into this film was that the music was going to be ukulele, mobile phone advert, super twee, but it's not at all. No. Which really helps. Yeah, the
soundtrack is very understated, but I really enjoyed it. It kind of really complements the pace of the film, where he's almost daydreaming his way through life. I found like the soundtrack on the whole was this kind of glacial, just really laid back soundtrack, which I think really complemented his character, especially on the most part.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I completely understand you would say that it's about nothing, but there's definitely themes within it, I would say. And one of the main themes, I think, is really sort of contrast or split in two of his life, of his sort of mundane, on the surface, humdrum life, and then his poetic and emotional life, which kind of rises above all of that. And I think there are lots of, this word sounds a bit A-level essay, but dichotomy, where things are split in two. So, you know, and his poems are also like that too. Most of his poems start off being about something really humdrum, like a matchbox.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, he's actually talking about love or something much higher than that. And I think that runs throughout. So of some of the things are, I think the music, actually, that's what reminded me of it, is because I think the music has both a dark and a light thing running through it simultaneously. Lots of black and white, obviously that's a massive theme going on, and night and day. So there's this bar he spends a lot of time in the evenings, and you only see it in the dark. And then at the end, he kind of walks past it in the daylight, and it's like a completely different place.
I didn't even recognise it.
And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. I think the contrast is quite an interesting thing to focus on, because I feel like obviously the two characters are quite contrasting, but they seem to really...
This is Paterson and his girlfriend Laura.
They're the main... There are other characters in there, but they're the main people you're seeing throughout the film. And as we say, one of them's much more quieter, and she's quite loud. She's always the ideas person saying,
she's quite animated,
I'm going to do
almost
this.
over animated. She's quite like a child, like a very overexcited child about things.
So even though they really contrast, I don't feel like they ever really clash. And, well, I think their relationship is one of the most fascinating things in the film. Because when it first started, I thought, what are these two about?
I found her quite annoying at the beginning, actually. And I thought she kind of wound me up a bit.
Yeah.
But then as it went on, you kind of got to understand their relationship more, how much she really cares about him. And that actually, they're really well suited. And then you kind of, it's just nice.
The way the film lays these little red herrings of something that it makes you think is going to be a plot device. I'm not going to say what any of these are. It makes you think, oh, they focused on that because this is going to happen next, and this means everything's going to go wrong for them, or this is going to be a plot device. It's not
like
the rest
a caper movie where
the rest of the film
something goes wrong and it spirals.
Yeah, and I feel like the director has purposefully placed these little things in there to make you think, oh, I know what's happening now. This is going to happen, and then. No, it doesn't happen. I feel like they're little things to just... I think that it makes the film very refreshing, because normally, even for something that's similar, kind of a bit quirky, a bit indie, they still use the same old tropes where one thing goes wrong and then that's the chain reaction for the rest of the film.
Or there's a twist and then you realise, oh, actually, all the little seeds for that twist have been planted all along, and, you know, sometimes you can spot it and sometimes you don't, but it's always been there.
So I think we both reasonably enjoyed the film. However, I think I probably had a few more issues with it than you did, where the references to poetry, not necessarily when he's doing his own poetry, in fact I prefer those bits, but because they come from a poetic town where a famous poet has come from before, there seems to be references where people just on the street ask him if he's a poet. It seems a bit forced and a bit jarring to me, those bits. They just... I understand why they're happening, I just think they could have been handled a bit better.
Yeah, they didn't bother me because I just kind of took it as its own place with its own quirks and odd people in it. So that didn't bother me too much. I did really like the poetic element of it, and I really enjoyed the poems in it, and I almost wished that there were more of them. The only bit that bugged me about the poetry was the way that he kind of read them out as if he was writing them at the same time, so kind of in a very stilted way that didn't really get across the full meaning of them, which... I thought it was a bit of a shame, because there's a bit later on where he reads out somebody's poem and reads it as if it is a poem, the way it should be read. And the difference there was pretty noticeable, and I wanted them all to be read that way. I find that, again, opposite to what you think. I actually think I preferred it, because I always think he approached his poems as if they were for him. Yeah. And he was just him reading them out as a narrator, because he never actually reads his own poems out during it. It's just his thought process as he was writing it, and that was all they were ever meant to be. I did like it because you kind of get them in two doses. You get an initial one where he gets the spark of an idea and starts writing it, and I thought it worked well there. But then when he read the whole thing, I found myself going back, because these poems are also come up on screen as in text form as well, and I found myself jumping back to the beginning to try and read it all as a poem, and that kind of distracted me a little bit. Yeah,
I didn't bother with that. Because I don't think the poems are meant to be good. I think they're meant to be a first draft, him writing his thoughts as they happen, raw, to the paper, and him not overanalyzing what they are. And I don't think anyone who writes poems really does them perfectly first time.
No.
So I think that was all they're ever meant to be.
The thing about the poems is they're good and they are sweet. They are not earth-shatteringly amazing, and that they kind of suit him and they suit the film really, in that they're just sort of sweet and charming without being crazy. I think Adam Driver is absolutely perfect in this role. And given that there is not much to the plot, it is very much carried by him, and it had to be the right person playing this part. And I can't actually imagine anybody else doing it as well as he did.
Yeah, well, Adam Driver at the moment, if you're unaware of the name, he played Kylo Ren in Star Wars The Force Awakens. He's also, his first breakthrough was in the TV show Girls.
Which we both watched and we liked him quite a lot in that,
and
didn't
you
we?
also might have seen him in Midnight Special, and he was also in Inside Llewyn Davis, the Coen Brothers film, playing a hilarious character.
The most amazing cameo is hilarious.
Yeah, so he's got quite a diverse back catalogue despite only really being on the scene for a few years, but he always seems to play someone who's a bit quirky and almost a bit, maybe not so much in Star Wars, but you're thinking what is going on in this guy's head all the time, because he's kind of unusual looking, but he backs that up with acting a bit odd, but in a very, not in a weird way. He never seems weird. He's just
interesting, and that's...
he's interesting. So him playing an interesting character here makes you really want to get into the characters. Why is he like this? Why is he so content?
I think, just from an entertainment point of view, he's interesting to watch and he's interesting to listen to, like the way he says some of the words when he is reading out the poems. It's just got such a personality to it that you wouldn't get from somebody else. Yeah. And Adam's performance is in quite contrast to the performance of Goldshifter.
See, with her performance, as you said earlier, I thought to start with, I thought she's just annoying, but then I think it's a few scenes you have with her on her own in the house when he's not around. I think they're quite insightful into the type of character that she is, and I think it's obviously not as big a performance because she's not the central part of the film, but I think it complements his performance very well. And
the other thing that I think this film is really about, and the risk of sounding cheesy, there's another character with a kind of side plot going on, a very minor one, and at one point he says, "What is life without love?" And I think that is very much at the heart of what this film is about, because if it wasn't for Paterson's relationship and how he kind of felt contented in himself, it would be a very different film. And I think that really comes through in eavesdrops on a lot of conversations on his bus. And you can see him just sort of smiling to himself and being happy. Yeah. And that's, when you are in love, that's how you feel, everything seems lovely and you just sort of smile to yourself, and that really runs through this film and makes it what it is. I think if that wasn't there, it would be boring as hell.
Yeah, perhaps so. Okay, so I think it's time to give our ratings for this one. What are you going to give it out of 5?
Oh, do you know, I think I'm going to really struggle with this score system being out of 5.
Well, yeah,
it's tough.
I know I've cheated last week by giving something a half, but maybe you're only allowed
one cheat. Ooh, I think really I would give it between a 3 and a 4.
So which is it, 3 or 4?
But I'm going to say 4, just because I think it is a good film and an unusual film.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to work on the assumption that 3 stars is a good film. So for me, I'm going to give it 3, but I did really enjoy it. I think there was a few things that just made me think, compared to other films I've seen recently, and I would give a 4, that would be a little bit lower. But I see I'm in that similar kind of category, but if I had to settle on a score...
if you go 3, I go 4, then... The listener can take the average, and then happy days.
Yes.
Hooray.
Well, hey.
Have we cheated the system?
No. Okay, so up next, Charlotte is going to be talking about Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. This is a film I have not seen, but Charlotte has, so over to you.
Yeah, so Arron is not a Potterhead.
Well, no, I'm not a pothead. I do enjoy the Harry Potter films, but I didn't really grow up watching them. I've only come to them later.
You've not read the books?
I've not read the books, no, but...
No.
But I appreciate that they're very well made, and I understand what a big fan base they've got, and I have seen all the films, and I did enjoy them. So this new one, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, is also directed by David Yates, who directed a lot of the later Harry Potter films, both Deathly Hallows films, if I'm correct, and stars Eddie Redmayne as Newt, who I think is a returning character from the original Harry Potter films, or is mentioned slightly.
Yeah, so basically Newt Scamander is the author of one of the books on Harry Potter and Co.'s syllabus at Hogwarts, and his book is Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, so they all study this book. So this is much previous to the goings-on of Harry Potter stories. It's actually set in 1920s New York, and they do a wonderful job of the scenery. It's really beautifully done. It's amazing to look at just how they've recreated 1920s New York. I mean, it's obviously looks very cinematic. I'm sure it's not gritty or realistic, but it is gorgeous.
So, just sorry to interrupt, but so what's going on in this film? What's the story?
Yep, so Newt arrives in New York off the boat, basically with a suitcase full of fantastic beasts. Yeah. And he has got creature-related reasons for going to America. But what is interesting is the difference in the magical communities between the UK and USA. And there's a lot of parallels you can draw, and it's especially relevant with how things are at the moment. But basically in the USA, the magical community is very much in the closet. Like, they would never reveal any magical powers to non-magical people. Whereas in the UK, it's a bit more open-minded. And in fact, Newt does say at one point that they have very backwards views about things in America, which good on J.K. Rowling for saying that. I'm sure there's things going on in the back of her mind when she's writing that, but one of the, attitudes that they have in the States is that magical and non-magical people may not enter into a relationship together, which is fine in the UK.
I see. So it seems like the theme of segregation is that a large plot point, or is that just something running in the parallel to the main storyline? Or
not necessarily segregation. Well, I suppose so. It is the magical community in New York are doing everything possible to hide their presence, and it's becoming increasingly difficult. And obviously, a mad British guy with a suitcase full of beasts is not going to help that situation when it comes to staying underground. One of the main differences and themes that's kind of a theme running through is that the magical community have quite different attitudes towards the non-magical community. So what's funny is that in the States they call them no-mag as opposed to muggle, which is the term used in Potter, yeah. So what is quite different about this film is that a muggle is one of the main characters, and he's played by Dan Fogler, and he's really great in it. And so basically what happens is Newt arrives, and there are a series of capers really, because some of his beasts escape. So he is trying to catch them all. It's really good. I mean, I thought the CGI was really good. That could easily have let it down. There's a lot of chaos, which I find quite stressful at times, but actually the music was interesting, the way they didn't use super stressful music at times when they could have made it seem a bit more urgent. So they kind of made it seem a bit softer and more friendly. And obviously when you've got a magic wand, you can just return all the chaos back to normal. So that eased my Monica type tendencies. There were also some quite scary bits, actually. I mean, it's a 12A, but there were some real bits where you're like, because there are dark forces at the same time as all these creature capers are going on.
So would you say it's more grown up than the original Harry Potter films? I mean, I'm aware that of the Harry Potter films, they start off a lot more child-friendly, and then towards the Deathly Hallows and stuff, they have a lot more adult themes running through them by then. So is it just a natural continuation from that point?
So I think it's more akin to the later films in terms of the dark themes that are running through it, but at the same time it's got a real lightness that comes from these weird and wonderful creatures that play quite a large part of it. I mean, there's one scene that I especially loved because I am a massive fan of Jim Henson, and I would have loved more of the animals to have been puppetry rather than CGI. But what I love is when there's a scene where you're kind of focusing on some things going on in the forefront, but then in the background you've got other little things scampering about that aren't really what it's all about, but you can't help noticing them all. And there's a scene like that I just absolutely loved.
So tell me more about the dark elements you mentioned.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but this all kind of stems from having to hide your magical ability and negativity that comes out of that, and the danger that comes out of that. But what's quite different or interesting is that one of the main baddies is a sort of puritanical witchfinder Christian type played by Samantha Morton, who is quite brilliant in it, and they're asking for a second Salem because they think that witchcraft is on the rise and they suspect something, so they're braying for blood almost and looking for people to blame for things that are going on to cleanse their city. So
it's all sounding very, very dark and sinister at the moment. Yeah. Is 12A too generous a thing? It's sounding terrifying.
There were some pretty scary bits in it where there were definitely children a lot younger than 12 in the cinema, and I would have been worried about certain bits of it, but they are fairly short-lived on the whole. You know, it's quite a fun film. And one of the things that I want to say in its praise also is that it didn't go too far with certain things. You know, it didn't hammer anything home too much. You know, there's some quite obvious themes and parallels. And also there were moments, I won't say what, but at the end where they could have just made it that step cheesier, but they just didn't. They just kept it just right, and that was quite pleasing, really, that they didn't do that.
Okay, so you're sounding reasonably positive about this film. Is there anything that you didn't like?
I would say that I wasn't sure on the whole about Eddie Redmayne's character. Not that it was a bad performance, but I felt like he'd really decided that Newt Scamander had a certain way of moving his face and a hunchy way of walking. There's a scene when he's running and he's almost sort of like the Hunchback of Notre Dame because I'm such an awkward character and I'm kind of loping. But then I kind of thought if he was in a Hogwarts background full of more people like that, it wouldn't have been that weird, but the fact that he's displaced into this sort of cosmopolitan New York where nobody has any visible sign of being a wizard makes it, kind of explains why it stood out so much, really. So when I thought about it like that, it didn't bother me as much.
So any further thoughts?
I just really enjoyed it, but I think one of the things that I like about Harry Potter, I'm not one of these crazy obsessed Harry Potter fans. I've read each of the books once and watched each of the films, well, most of them once, maybe a couple of them more than once. But one of the best things about them is the escapism for me. They're the ultimate, I just want to forget about everything and let's go into this alternate universe and just, obviously it's got its own problems, but it's that lovely escapism. And this did all of that for me, especially at Christmas time. It just seemed like the perfect film.
Okay, so that sounds like a pretty glowing review. What's your rating?
It is a glowing review. I guess I just want to say for the film of its type, if you know what I mean. So for that type of film, it was probably as good as it could have been for me, but it's still not the kind of film that would ever get to a 5 in my head. Yeah. So yeah, again, I would probably want to put it between a 3 and a 4.
Come on, none of this. Pick 3 or 4.
But because it's Christmas and I was enjoying my popcorn and the whole cinema experience, I'm going to give it a 4. Probably in the fullness of time, I might think it's a 3. Okay.
Even when I get around to seeing it, I will update you all with my review and score. Finally, this week we're going to look at Star Trek Beyond, the third in the series of the new Star Trek films. So this one's directed by Justin Lin, which is a departure for the series, as the previous ones were directed by the now Star Wars director, J.J. Abrams. And Justin Lin has previously directed the Fast and Furious films, and I think that is a good starting point for the kind of feeling of this film. I've only seen a couple of the previous Fast and Furious films. I don't know if you've seen any, but I think it definitely...
I think maybe one.
Probably just the first one.
When it came out.
Yeah. I think that the high-octane, very saturated look of those films has come through in this one. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think he's very much tried to make the Star Trek 3 in as much of the same vein as the first 2 as possible, rather than necessarily the hardcore of what Star Trek is all about.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people who are big Star Trek fans which, well, to be honest, isn't either of us.
No.
We're kind of disappointed by the way that all of these new films have gone. And from before I'd seen this one, I'd heard more criticism about this third one than either of the previous 2.
Yeah, and we both really liked the first 2.
Yeah, and especially, well, not especially the second one, but the second one was beginning to get a little bit more criticism, but I still thoroughly enjoyed it. I know it revisited an older storyline, but again, not something we were too familiar with, so it still felt quite fresh. So the film still centres around mostly the same characters. Captain Kirk, played by Chris Pine, Spock, played by Zachary Quinto, are still the main 2, supported by the likes of Zoe Saldana playing Uhura and Carl Urban playing Bones.
Major cheese ball.
I mean, he was cheesy as hell in the first 2, but my God, man, he's cheesy in this one.
My God, man, he's a what's it.
And the only real new character, because even though the bad guy is played by Idris Elba, which I would never have guessed in a million years because his voice is different and he doesn't look anything like him. And the only new main character is a new girl alien called Jailer, played by Sophia Boutella, who I think plays a bit of a boring character for me.
It's pretty two-dimensional. Yeah. I mean, she has got funny moments. And it has got funny moments in this film. I found it really hilarious, though, when you first encounter the character of Jailer. There's all these male alien brutes who are all kinds of ugly, and then there's her who's this sort of sexy, super blonde alien with sort of eyeliner patterns all over her face. It's just like, oh, come on,
Yeah, it felt very, very lazy that it was kind of like, oh, this is someone that all the other ones are horrendous, savage brutes, but, oh, no, the nice one, she's the the one who just looks like a human woman, basically.
Yeah, or the female one is gorgeous and the rest all sort of look like blobs.
Yeah. So, yeah, there was, to be honest, I had a lot of issues with this film. I felt the pacing was all over the place. The film starts with ridiculous amounts of action. The whole world is being ripped apart.
Yeah.
Everything you know from the other ones has been shredded to the ground within minutes. You're just left thinking, what is going on here?
It's like they were trying too hard, really. I mean, the camera landed on each of the main actors for almost the minimum time possible just to refresh your mind that they're there and who they are. And then it was like, okay, we need to not lose them now. Let's just throw everything at it. And it all just kind of exploded.
It was kind of, they were thrown into an impossible situation so early in the film. It just kind of made me lose interest quite quickly of thinking, well, if they can be defeated this easily, what chance have they ever got? And then the film weirdly transforms into a bit of a buddy film where they all seem to conveniently get paired off into an unusual pairing where it almost turns into a bit of a comedy caper film, which, again, I think that's probably the stronger part for me because some of these characters that we've learned to at least know, if not enjoy, in the previous films, it's nice to actually spend a bit of time with them in a unusual situation.
Yeah.
But I think, as you were mentioning earlier about Bones and his cheesiness, I feel like all the characters now have become a parodied version of themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the film did get more and more cheesy and more cliched plotline as it went along. I mean, some of the scenes, I thought, you might say in its defence, did seem quite original Star Trek in the we've landed on this planet and it's full of pink polystyrene rocks sort of thing.
But I think we've probably got to a point now where we expect a bit more from it than this. For the amount that looks like it's been spent on the visuals, and some of the space battles look incredible, some of the bits on the planets I thought looked pretty ropey for a brand new film with probably a huge budget. And I thought that would be the one thing that this film would definitely have going for it, would be that the visuals were great, even if some of the other stuff was being a bit left behind. But I didn't even feel that with it.
When we talk about a lazy plot, I mean, there is a scene where they're around a table with a sort of battle map and they're using random odds and ends to represent different people. And then somebody goes, well, how will we get past XYZ? And then our hero goes, I've got an idea or something. And then it pans away to blah, blah, blah. Just like, oh, God.
Yeah, well, obviously I didn't say it on the podcast. It didn't exist then. But that was a major criticism I had with the Star Wars Force Awakens, was that when they got to this... I think we're all okay with that. It was barely even a spoiler. When they got to the main part of how do we blow up the Death Star, it was kind of like, oh yeah, there's always a way of doing that. And I thought that was a weak part of that film. But this takes the absolute biscuit with it, where all the time, whenever there's anything that needs explaining, they'll all stand around, explain the plot, explain what they're going to do next, and they'll find a convenient way of doing something incredibly difficult within about 10 seconds.
They'll go, I know how, and then they'll show you just how they know how, and then they'll save the day.
And then they go and bloody do it.
But the way they bloody do it is so... Well, I don't know what to say.
It's just a real mess of a. It's all so predictable. Each point, I mean, we watched this at home, so we weren't violating the code by talking to each other. And to be honest, I think you need to talk to each other a bit during this film to keep yourself sane. Just saying, oh, well, that's obviously what they're going to do next. He's going to do that. Oh, 5 seconds later, he goes and does it. It's so predictable, but still manages to be a complete shambles where you don't really know why any of the characters are doing anything they're doing.
No. I guess the ostensive premise of this film is that they're sort of all losing their way, losing their faith a little bit, isn't it? Like they're all considering doing one and doing something else, and then they have one last hurrah and oh, now we've all changed our minds and we never want to leave each other ever again. Sorry, that was a spoiler, but they don't all break into a million pieces and never see each other ever again.
No, James Bond doesn't die. I mean, I wouldn't say the film is completely awful. There's plenty of bits I enjoyed. There's plenty of lots of little laughs, especially references and lines from older characters. I mean, I know Bones' lines are really cheesy, but I've always quite enjoyed them.
You are a cheeser.
They went too far, but there was definitely still some that I enjoyed. I think Chris Pine as Kirk is still really good casting, even if he has become, I'm always going to be the bravado hero.
Yeah, but he is a bit more world-weary, and he actually, I think he really starting to look like Shatner in one or two shots. He looks quite gnarly in the face department. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's Shatner's bassoon. Yeah, so not without some merits. But yeah, not a strong one. So I don't think we're going to linger on this one too long. So I think for me, I'm going to give this one 2 stars out of 5. I wish it was more because I really enjoyed the first 2, but I feel like the series is losing its way a bit. I think it's too easy to blame it on the change of director because maybe some people would argue that it was already starting to go a little bit downhill on the last film. So yeah, just a 2 from me. What would you say?
Yeah, I would also give it a 2. Along your lines of thinking that 3 is still a pretty good film, and I gave Your Name 3, and that was a good film. And this is nowhere near as good as that.
Yeah, and I gave Paterson a 3, and I much preferred Paterson to this. Though it's funny, they're different films for different moods. I'm sure on a different day I may have preferred this one because this is a film that, if you enjoyed the other ones, I think it's probably still just about worth having a watch.
Yeah, I mean, if you know and love the characters, it's a romp, you know.
Yeah, whereas Paterson is definitely something you would need to be in the mood for. So, yeah, I think that's it from us this week.
That's right.
So you've been listening to Films Not Movies podcast, episode 3.
Thanks a lot.
See you next time.
Bye.
Goodbye.